Hello everyone. I hope you guys are fine. This is your facilitator for strategic business leadership exam uh, in English language. In last class, we covered two past papers, right? Question Zilber was done, right? And question Ling was done. It was properly drafted, right? Done and drafted. So we did that, and that's really a good thing for us, a strong pace if you are going line by line with the classes I am providing you, right? So it's gonna be great. uh, then I gave you two questions as an homework, CheapKit and Domosco, right? I'll suggest everyone to provide me homework questions in a Word file, right? In a Word file so that I could mark it. So that's gonna be great if you are guys are going to provide me your answers in Word format. Just remember one thing, that checking is an important part of SBL. If I am solving, I can solve each and every past paper. I'll be solving very much more past papers than you're expecting me. But again, I want you guys to contribute also, right? You guys need to be solving as much as past papers I am solving, right? And again, if I am saying you did this past paper, that means answer is done. That means examiner answer is read, right? That means examiner answer is read. And that means you have covered each and everything and made pointers, yeah, learners for you, right? Pointers or learners for you. I've made pointers for every past papers. I can show you, right? I can show you, see. See, in last class, we solved link. In last class, we solved link. So here's the pointers of link. See, here's the pointers of link, right? These points can be written. You just need to draft these points and they are going to be the best, right? So I have made pointers for every question. Like if you see that you are getting less points, so here are the pointers, right? So here are the pointers, and I'll be providing you two. In fact, they are included in my book, so no need to worry in that, right? No need to worry in that case. But the problem is, I want you guys to contribute. I want you guys to make pointers. I want you guys to solve the questions as much as possible so that you guys can learn, right? So that you guys can learn, else you cannot learn. So back to the scope. We gave you two homeworks. That's CheapKit and Domosco, right? That's CheapKit and Domosco. So CheapKit and Domosco are your homework. You need to solve it by yourself without even seeing my answers or pointers, and so that I can assess that how much you add value. Currently, we are not focusing on skills, right? We are not focusing that much on professional marks, right? I'll take classes after the mini mocks of skills, professional marks, and I'll see the formats. These things are not of a focus till now. We are just learning the drafting drills, right? I'll take many classes for the professional marks. We'll be solving line by line questions of skepticism, line by line questions of analysis, line by line questions of evaluation. So no need to worry in that, guys, right? So it was request of a one student that at least solve CheapKit also with you. So I have my own drafted answer. I'll read this question. We'll discuss the theoretical topics. We'll discuss the theoretical topics associated with this question, right? Associated with this question. We are going to be doing that, right, with this question. And then we are going to move on. And then we are going to move on my answer, right? So in today's class, our target is to cover CheapKit. And if anyone has solved CheapKit, he can send me on my WhatsApp. I'm connected with you guys through your WhatsApp group or on my FB page or on my LinkedIn or on my Twitter, wherever you guys want to contact, you can, and we can continue, right? So the question is CheapKit. It is in BBP's book, right? It is in BBP's book. But you don't need to buy that. I have included everything in my book. You just need to go onto your LMS and download my book. That's it. That's the complete SBL tool you guys need. Right? That's the complete SBL tool you guys need. Another thing the student asks, sir, when we'll be covering the theoretical topics? See, I'll be solving around 20 to 25 past papers. So if we are solving those 20 to 25 past papers, we are going to cover 50 or 60 topics of theory. Still, we'll be having theoretical classes also, but later part of the sessions, right? Not on the earlier part. And since I'm re-recording the whole course just for you, as the format is changed, as the everything is changed, so that's gonna be great for you guys, right? Now, CheapKit, right? It's the mini mock. It's available in my book, page number 215. So you have recently joined CheapKit as a senior finance manager reporting to finance director. So again, you guys have been given a single role and you have been reporting to the senior finance director, right? So a single role. And single reportee. Probably you have got the single reportee, right? Probably you have got the single reportee. Now, CheapKit is large clothes retailer based in Estland. So CheapKit is a large cloth retailer. I've told you the easiest industry is that if in which you have guys have worked in, right? So you must know that if you have got an industry that you have worked in, so you're gonna pass that exam because you have that skeptical knowledge of industry which you require, right? Which you guys require. So you have recently joined CheapKit as a senior finance manager reporting to finance director. CheapKit is a large clothes retailer based in Estland. So it's in Estland, right? A major developed country whose currency is dollars. So its currency is dollars, right? Now, CheapKit sells a wide range of products. But its underlying aim is to sell fashionable clothes at the lowest possible prices. So now its aims are to sell the fashionable clothes at lowest possible prices. So they are the price focused entity, right? They are the price focused entity. They are not the brand, I'll say, or not the luxury they could be classified, right? Not the luxury they could be classified because it seems to be this seems to be a company who focuses on prices, who wants to reduce the prices, right? Now, CheapKit obtains most of its clothes from suppliers in developing countries. So now they have got clothes from suppliers in developing countries also, right? A factory belonging to one of the CheapKit supplier, corn flour, collapsed recently. Now here's an issue, right? If someone is a really skeptic person, he must think that there can be some ethical issues associated with that, right? There can be some ethical issues associated with that, and you guys know that ethics is a very important part for every international body, right? And you guys knew that the ethics is very important part for every international body. So if a building is collapsed and if it's your supplier, there can be some ethical stances. Right? Killing or injuring number of people. So that's, you knew just from the case beginning that there are some issues. The finance director has warned you that working at CheapKit will be busy. Oh, finance director has asked you that working at CheapKit is going to be busy and he'll need you to help him with a number of different tasks, right? However, he arranged induction meetings for you. So he has arranged induction meetings for us with key members of staff, as well as giving you file with some useful information, right? Now he has given us some useful information. Exhibit 1 is press report, CheapKit's company analysis, right, from a reputable business newspaper. Exhibit 2 is given you by CheapKit's procurement director during your induction meeting. So Exhibit 2 is a CheapKit's procurement director message for us. Then Exhibit 3, a press article following the accident at Cornflowers factory, right? So it's a press article following the accident of Cornflowers factory. Then Exhibit 4, blog posting, and Exhibit 5, memo of the sales director. And Exhibit 5, memo of the sales director. So you guys have been given 5 exhibits, right? And don't forget, in the last class, I told you about exhibit allocation, right? Don't forget, in the last class, I told you about exhibit allocation, that if you guys want, you can allocate the exhibits to the requirements. Although examiner likes you connect different exhibits. It is the favorite thing of examiner. But if you want one particular exhibit for one particular requirement, that's also fair, right? But try to connect more exhibits in more requirements. Try to connect more exhibits in more requirement, right? Yeah. So now the case requirements are. So now the case requirements are included in the following tasks shown below. Number 1A, the directors are going to discuss CheapKit's strategic plans at the next meeting, and the finance director thinks it will be useful to have an analysis of the business environment to provide some context of their discussion. So they want CheapKit's strategic plans to be discussed. I have allocated the green color to this requirement so that I could make a planner on my question paper. I don't need a planner separately. I'll make the planner on my question paper by making this kind of stuff, right? So the directors are going to discuss CheapKit's strategic plans at the next board meeting, and the finance director thinks it will be useful to have an analysis of the business environment to provide some context for their discussion. From information you have gathered during your time at CheapKit and using an appropriate framework, prepare a briefing note. So here the briefing notes are there, evaluating the business environment in which the CheapKit operates. Now you have to evaluate the environment. Come on. Now you have to evaluate the environment. Come on, which model we need to use here? Tell me which model we need to use here. So the model we need to use here is pastel, because it's in order to analyze an environment, business environment, pastel is the best thing. I've told you that this type of words such as appropriate framework are not going to be part of your course, are not going to be part of your exam, right? So you need to use the format, and you are allowed not to use the format. That's totally up to you guys, right? Skills are off. Evaluation skills, you guys know the basics, that evaluation is pros and cons. Evaluation is pros and cons, right? Evaluation is pros and cons. 8 and 2 marks. So now it comes around 10 marks, and we'll be making around 8 points to that, right? 8 points to that. And I'll be just reminding you guys that I am going to solve or write more in front of you, so that you should be focusing on drafting, right? Write more in front of you, so that you should be more in focusing of drafting. You should be more in line with focusing on drafting, right? So the first requirement we have, so the first requirement after reading the case we have, and just to remind you that these are the mini mocks. These are the small papers of SBL. We'll be looking to SBL after the 4th mini mock. Once you guys have done after the 4th mini mock, we're surely going to be looking to SBL's larger paper and the greater paper, and you'll be at least be prepared mentally that we have solved the 50 marks question, and then now we can dive into the 100 marks question, right? And now we can dive on to the 100 marks question. So here's that the second requirement that has been asked. The second requirement that has been asked is topic for discussions, board meeting in CheapKit's relationship with its stakeholders. You must know stakeholders. If not, I'll teach you stakeholder. Don't worry. We'll be redirecting towards stakeholder, and how this could influence the company strategy. So you need to maintain a relationship with your stakeholder, as they could implement or influence your company strategy. And finance director has asked you for some input. Required is analyze stakeholder claims of CheapKit's customers, suppliers, and pressure groups such as PWR, and how these claims may be in conflict. And how these claims may be in conflict, right? So again 10 marks. So at least 7 to 8 points. Now see what the questions demand. They want you to analyze the stakeholder claims of CheapKit's customers, suppliers, and pressure groups. First, you need to understand what are stakeholders. We are going to learn that, no worries. We are going to have a look on that, no worries, right? And how these claims may be in conflict, how each stakeholder's claim can be a conflicting claim, right? How customers' claims from CheapKit can be conflicting with suppliers' claim, how customers' claim with CheapKit can be in conflict of suppliers' claim. You should be thinking of that, right? You should be thinking of that, right? And professional skills are of analytical skills. You need to analyze, right? Uh, Usually in analysis, we calculate ratios, but I don't think so that conflicting claims could calculate ratios here, side. So no ratios in this requirement. But again, we got two interesting requirements. One is pastel, which is I would just say a replica of the last question we attended. And then there's a new requirement. The beauty of SBL, is that new requirements in exams. You're going to be facing some new requirements. I guess 80% of you students knew what are the stakeholders. But what can be a stakeholder claim and how that stakeholder claim is going to be in conflict and how that stakeholder claim is going to be in conflict with CheapKit's other stakeholders, right? So how these claims can be in conflict with CheapKit's other stakeholders. You should be thinking of that also, right? So now, as the procurement director, next requirement. Now see, it's 1A, right? Then we have 1B, and then we have 1C. Now what's 1C? A change in color is required. As the procurement director mentioned in your induction meeting, CheapKit's board has identified 3 areas of risk, right? CheapKit's board has identified 3 areas of risk which they believe are particularly important: exchange rate, supply chain, and international political risk. Now, the board thinks that these 3 risks are important, and these are exchange rate risk. These 3 risks are important, and these are exchange rate risk, supply chain risk, and international political risk. Now, the board thinks, right? Board thinks these risks are important for CheapKit. The FD has asked for your thoughts on these risk areas and why they are important for CheapKit's shareholders. And why they are important for CheapKit's shareholders required is explain these risks and how each of them may be significant for CheapKit's shareholder. Now, here's the definitions they have asked. They usually ask the definitions, right? They usually ask the definitions, but in this requirement, they have asked definitions. So we're going to be define these risks, which is an easy task. You know, exchange rate risk, right? You know, supply chain risk, and how they may be significant for CheapKit shareholders, and how these risks are significant for CheapKit, and how these risks are significant for CheapKit, guys. By law, this question needs to be attempted by you, but I am solving this in front of you just to give you the confidence, right? So be attentive in the class. So explain these risks and how each of them may be significant for CheapKit shareholders, and how each of them may be significant for CheapKit shareholders. So its professional skill marks are available for commercial acumen. You need to sound commercially, and that's 10 marks, so around 7 to 8 points. It's 10 marks and around 7 to 8 points, right? So that is it. That is it, right? Yeah. Now the second thing. Now the next requirement. Now repeat the requirements with yourself. While reading the case, you must have got the requirements with yourself, right? While reading the case, you must have got requirements by yourself. And those are pestle analysis of the industry that CheapKit operates, right? Then we have stakeholder claims. Then we have risks. Then we have risks, right? Now the second question. The board feels that CheapKit's reputation has been damaged following the publication of Jess Louis' letter. Now this indicates that this requirement is totally to Jess Louis' letter. This requirement belongs to Jess Louis' letter, and Jess Louis' letter was this, I guess, the blog posting. So now you can allocate the exhibit. That here's the exhibit 4 pertains to this requirement. So now we allocated exhibit 4. We are going to use 1A, 1B, 1C for multiple exhibits. But in second requirement, we're going to be using exhibit 4 as our prime source because the data belongs to it. We're going to be using the exhibit 4 as our prime source because data belongs to it, right? So now, for her blog, which have received a lot of supportive comments in the media, right? Which have received a lot of supporting comments in the media. Therefore, the board has decided to make a public response to her comments, and finance director has asked you to draft a press statement. Now you guys need to draft a press statement. Now you see the difficulty level of SBL. They want you to be a press person also. Here, the important learning of this question. The important learning of this question. Writing a press statement. Sir, has ever press statement has been tested in the exam? Yeah. In December 18, the press statement highlight question was tested. In December 18, the press statement was tested in highlight. So, directors has asked you to draft a press statement that includes from CheapKit explaining its role as a corporate citizen. Now you need to define yourself as a corporate citizen. Now you need to define yourself as a corporate citizen given its international supply chain. Professional skill marks are available for demonstrating communication skills. Professional skills marks are available for communication skills, for the tone of statement and responding diplomatically. Now you guys have to respond diplomatically. See, in press, you don't need to admit your mistake. You're not going to be admitting your mistake. I don't exactly remember a CEO named of a very well-reputed organization just admitted the mistake in front of the press and he was just terminated, right? He just accepted the terminated. He just accepted the mistake of its press in front of the press and he got terminated from the job. That how dare you? You could use that we regret that through our organization or through the medium used by our organization, this was held badly and we very regret we have paid the compensation. You need to use such kind of words, right? We are a corporate citizen. We pay employees well. We give them work-life balance. We give them each and everything. You guys need to do that, right? You guys need to do that rather than admitting your mistakes in front of a press. So writing a press statement requires communication skills that you should be clearly evident of the case. Now here, what I feel like is that the building is collapsed. The Jess Louis must have criticized you and the board wants you to draft an answer. So if you're drafting an answer, you should be saying that the Jess Louis criticism is vague and we are not the culprit for the collapse. In fact, that was not our collapse. It was one of our suppliers. So how could we collapse them, right? So you should be thinking of that. Now here comes 6 marks and 2 marks. So we're going to be making at least 5 to 7 points or 6 points. Now the last question is Although sales director seems enthusiastic about contract yummy, some of the other directors are less keen to it. Any exhibit you can allocate? So memo from sales director of CheapKit's new business opportunity. This seems to be the exhibit of this requirement. This seems to be the exhibit of this requirement. So although the sales director seems to be enthusiastic about the potential contract from Yummy, some of the other directors are less keen on it. Some of the other directors are less keen on it, and the finance director has asked you for your thoughts. So advise whether or not CheapKit should accept contract from Yummy, taking into account the risk and strategic implication as well as financial returns and skepticism skills. So this would also include some calculation, as it's kind of a appraisal. It's kind of an appraisal, so it gives you around 12 marks. So nice points you need to make, right? If you're not performing calculation, so 8 to 10 points are mandatory to be made right here. The points can be of 3 to 4 marks. So now attentively listen, all of you. That we have 5 requirements if in this company. The industry is of clothing industry. So if anyone has worked in that industry, it's beneficial for them. They must be listening the requirements they are going to make, right? The first one is pesto. We need to analyze CheapKit's. We need to analyze CheapKit's model, right? Business environment. Then second one is stakeholder claims and how they can be in conflicting, right? You must know stakeholder, right? If you guys don't know, we're gonna be covering the theoretical portions. Don't worry. Then we have C part, and that's the some risk. They need definition of some risk. And then they want these risks to be how they can be significant for CheapKit's shareholders, right? Then the second part is that you need to make a press statement for the CheapKit's board to determine your duty as a corporate citizen and given its international supply chain, right? And the last requirement is Yummy contract to be evaluated. So we haven't read any data till, and we have got 5 requirements, and now we have 5 exhibits to go through, right? And now we have 5 exhibits to go through. So let's just repeat the requirement. Let's just have a look onto the requirements again by yourself so that we can read the exhibits and discuss the answer. We can just read the exhibits and discuss the answers, right? If there are any questions, the guys who attempted the classes live can ask me on Zoom chat box. And if you guys are taking the recording sessions, you just can text me on WhatsApp. I'll be available for your queries, right? Guys, if there are any queries, you guys can text me. We shall be reading soon. So let's just read the case, keep your requirement in your mind, so then we can look onto the answers, right? So here we go. Press report, CheapKit, company analysis, right? Now it's a press report of a CheapKit's company analysis. For most fashion retailers, e-commerce plays a key role in fulfilling customer demands. Yeah, e-commerce plays a key role. However, CheapKit has achieved its success despite not having an online store. They do not have an online store. So this point can be used in technological. And student highlighted that this point needs to be used in technological. They haven't got any online store, although they are successful fulfilling the customer demands, right? The lack of an online store does not mean that CheapKit does not have an online presence. CheapKit has generated active online following in which customers share photos and images of the recent purchases. So CheapKit has online existence, right? CheapKit have that. The lack of online store does not mean that CheapKit does not have an. Sorry, I just read that para. CheapKit recently announced that it's opening 5 new stores, and the finance director said that despite the fact that economy in Iceland is relatively weak, so we got the points of economics also. That economy in Iceland is relatively weak. Customers recognize the value of money which CheapKit offers, and we expect to see like-for-like sales continuing to increase over the next year. So now they expect that CheapKit's gonna be making like-for-like sales continuing to increase. So that's just like the CheapKit sales are going to be increased. However, the company warned that the rising cost of key raw materials such as cotton, because the currency is relatively weak, right? So there's a rising cost pressure, and relatively weak value of Iceland currency could reduce profit margins, as could increase minimal wage in Iceland, which the government is expected to announce in the next budget. Many of the retail assistants who work in CheapKit stores are paid at a minimum wage. So they pay the minimum wage, right? So they pay the minimum wage. Now, the company would not comment on whether its prices would increase during the coming year, but most analysts think it is likely. So their prices might be impacted by the coming budget they are going to announce. As one analyst noted, ensuring product ranges remain fashionable. Ensuring the product ranges remain fashionable will be the vital sales, because the cost increase are likely to affect all retailers, putting pressure on their margins. So because of the relatively weak currency, their costs might be increasing. And if their costs are going to be increasing, that means, the pressures are on their margin. Now, changing consumer attitudes to fashion could also be significant, right? Changing consumer attitudes to fashion could also be significant. Although some still want to be able to buy new fashion lines as quickly and cheaply as possible, others are becoming more critical of so-called fast fashion on basis that it encourages a throwaway culture. Now, it's a social aspect that some people think that the fashion should be as fast as it can be, while the other people thinks that fashion leads to throwaway culture of the old clothes they have bought, right? Throwaway culture of the old clothes they have bought, right? So where clothes might only be worn once before being discarded. So critics of fast fashion argue that it's not socially responsible, either in terms of impact of the throwaway culture has one resource usage, or in terms of a supply chain. Companies like CheapKit rely on suppliers in developing countries to supply them with low-cost products. So companies like CheapKit rely on suppliers in developing countries, right, with low-cost products. But there is a human cost involved in terms of low wages, poor working conditions experienced in factories. There's a global pressure to introduce tougher health and safety regulation and to improve working conditions. So now think what this para tells, This para tells that customers like CheapKit, companies like CheapKit relies in the developing countries supply to low cost product. Why? Because they want to supply the low price, right? Because they want to supply their product at the low price, and for that they need to buy the products from the low cost, right? But there is some human cost involved of the minimum wages, poor working conditions. They need to be good, right? They need to be very good so that they can go on, right? So this was exhibit 1, and that seems nice. This was exhibit 1, and that seems nice. It has given us some paras which can be made. It has given us some paras which can be made, right? Then we have exhibit 2. Then we have exhibit 2. Uh, Briefing note given to you by CheapKit's procurement director during your induction meeting. So briefing note given to you by CheapKit's procurement director during your induction meeting. Our business strategy is based around cost leadership. So they are the cost leaders, and we pride ourselves selling fashionable garments for men, women, children at low prices compared to main rivals. So they sell the things at the low prices compared to their main rivals. Now, for many years, we have been able to maintain our low prices by carefully sourcing our garments from suppliers in developing countries, right? Where labor is cheaper than S-land. Where labor is cheaper than S-land. So they have been based on the other countries and the cheaper suppliers, right? Where the labor is cheaper. Also, we typically earn a gross margin of 10 to 13%, right? They usually earn a gross margin of 10 to 13%. So that's great. But I'm going to use this margin in evaluation of my product, right? When I'm going to do the evaluation of the fifth part, I'm going to use this margin that. I'm going to use this margin there when I'm going to evaluate the yearly contract. Whereas most clothing retailers look at margins in the region of 20%, whereas most clothing retailers look at margins of regions of 20%. As CheapKit is a company with complex international supply chain, the board regularly reviews the company's risk, right? The board has identified 3 risks, particular concern of the CheapKit shareholders: exchange rate. Yeah, exchange rate is a significant risk because they are import-based company. They import the raw material outside, right? They import the raw material outside. So the board has correctly identified this risk. Right? The company's risk, particular concerns, CheapKit stakeholders, exchange rate risk, supply chain risk, right? And international political risk. Each one of these risks is carefully monitored, and the board receives regular briefings on each of the board that any of these risks could be potential source of substantial loss to our shareholders, right? So each of these risks could be a potential source of substantial loss to our shareholders. Now, for the past decade or so, CheapKit has bought substantial proportion profit suppliers from Athland, a relatively poor developing country. They have been dealing with the suppliers with the poor developing country. They have been dealing with the suppliers of the poor developing country, known for its low labor cost and weak regulatory controls. Last year, 65% of CheapKit supplies came from this country. Now, 65% of supplies, right? So we are totally dependent on this country, we can say. We are totally dependent on this country, as it does all the suppliers from foreign countries. CheapKit pays Athland suppliers in their own currency. Now, although Athland has a reputation for corruption, including among government officials, its workforce is hardworking and reliable. The government official seems to be corrupt, but their workforce is hard and reliable. Now, most employees in Athland garment industry are employed on 0 hours contract, meaning that they are employed by the hour as they are needed and released with no pay. So they are just like performance related pay. If they are being hired, they're gonna be paid for that. But after the work is closed, they're gonna be bye-bye. Right? Now, CheapKit exhibit 3 we have. and then Exhibit 4. Now, Exhibit 3 is including article following the accident of cornflowers factory. So Exhibit 3 is including the article following the factors of cornflower factory. Now see, what's that? It's an article. Remember that, right? And we might be replying to that article. We might be replying to that article for the press releases, or might be to the blog that Jess Louis has posted. Anything can be done that, right? Now, in the aftermath of the tragedy at Cornflowers factory, our reporter has been looking into these factors which contributed to the collapse, right? And has uncovered some very worrying findings. See, some very worrying findings have been uncovered now. After only 2 years of normal operation, the new cornflower building collapsed. Now, they collapsed in 2 years with the loss of over 1,000 lives, collapsing slowly at first, and the number of people killed and injured was made worse by shortage of escape exits. Now they were shortage of escape exits, right? There was shortage of escape exits and large number of people in the building. As news of the tragedy was broadcasted around the world, commentators reported that the weakness in the building was due to West's obsession with cheap clothes. Now see, there was a broadcast in which they said that the West has an obsession of cheap clothes, which buy from them, and they made a building just like that which collapsed in 2 years of operation. Cornflower is a significant and long-standing supplier, right? Cornflower is a significant and long-standing supplier to the cloths retailer CheapKit. Around half of CheapKit's purchases from Athland are from cornflower, right? Around half of CheapKit's purchases from Athland are from cornflower. Owned by Fusilli brothers, Cornflower outgrew its previous factory and wished to build a new manufacturing facility in Athland, which permission from local government authority was required, although they are just bribed like a person. So that was given. In order to gain the best location for the new factory and to hasten the planning process, it appears the Fusilli brothers paid a substantial bribe to local government officials. It's a story building activity, right? We do not get anything to draft, but we are getting the story feeded. What's the scenario here? So now the Fusilli brothers paid a substantial bribe to local government officials. When we asked Cornflower about this, the company's response was that Fusilli brothers had felt under a great pressure from CheapKit to keep their prices low, so they sought to reduce overall expenditure, including the capital investment. Now, it has been just concluded and thought that Fusilli brothers were pressurized by CheapKit for keeping the prices low, so they thought that we should invest the low capital. So they thought that we should invest the low capital, right? Right? Because the enforcement of building regulation is weak in Athland, the officials responsible for building quality enforcement were bribed to provide a weak level of inspection when construction began, thereby allowing the brothers to avoid the normal Athland building regulations, right? Thereby allowing the brothers to avoid normal Athland building regulations. Now, in order to save cost, inferior building materials were used, which would result in a lower total capital outlay. So inferior building materials were used, right? Which would result in a lower total capital outlay, as well as faster completion time. In order to maximize usable floor space, the brothers were also able to have a new building completed without necessary number of skips, doors, and staff facilities. So they just compromised on everything. They just compromised on everything. In each case, bribes were paid to officials to achieve the outcomes the facility brothers wanted. So everything was bribed, right? Everything was bribed in this case. Now, once manufacturing began in the new building, high demand from CheapKit meant that Cornflower was able to increase employment in the facility. Although, according to Athland building regulations, the floor area could legally accommodate 500 employees. That's the regulation of that country, that any building that are going to be accommodated a person, they should be around 500. But 1,500 were often working in the building in order to fulfill the orders from foreign customers like CheapKit. So that means that this cornflower factory was operating itself unethically, with doing each and everything wrongly, and they did that, right? We asked CheapKit for a comment, but for the company would only state that it had entered into a legal contract with Cornflower in order to provide its customer with exceptional value for money. CheapKit said that it was appalled and disgusted that Cornflower had acted corruptly, and that the CheapKit board was completely unaware of the weakness and the safety breaches. So CheapKit just took their hands off, that we don't know anything. We just wanted the best thing for our customer. We don't know that they have been acted unethically. They have bribed many things. They have bribed. They don't know the escape exits. They don't created the escape exits. They don't hire. They were using more than 500. We didn't knew that. We just wanted good quality material at cheaper prices. So that was CheapKit's stance. And if you were guys were at the CheapKit's place, that's gonna be also your stance, right? That's for sure your stance. Now, Exhibit 4. Blog posting by Jess Louis. Exhibit 4. Blog posting by Jess Louis. Now, what's that? See, one person who escaped the Cornflowers building as it collapsed was Jess Louis. One person who escaped the Cornflowers building as it was collapsed was Jess Louis, although the witnessed number of people who had been killed during the collapse. Jess is also the leader of National Press Group, which has now it's the press group, right? It seems around the stakeholder question. PWR. Here it is, the PWR, pressure groups, the PWR, right? So they have PWR, pressure groups now. So Jess Louis, she was a person, or he was the person who survived, is basically a leader. We'll say a leader, right? PWR. She was the leader, which has been lobbying Athland government to improve working conditions. After the accident, Jess posted a blog on PWR's account in which she wrote, although the Athland government must do more to enforce health and safety legislation, much of the blame for the accident lies with CheapKit. Much of the blame with the accident lies with CheapKit, right? And the pressure it continuously placed on cornflowers to keep prices low. It was the pressure the CheapKit made on the cornflower to keep the prices low. They don't say to hire more people. They don't say that build an early building. They just say to keep the prices low. Is it acceptable for multinational companies such as CheapKit to exert so much pressure on the companies based in developing countries? Is it that much important? You are supplying a market in your home country which is obsessed with cheap clothes. Nobody at CheapKit cares about how the clothes are produced. They just want the cheap clothes, right? All you care about is how many clothes you sell, and keeping the prices cheap helps you sell more clothes. The constant pressure on prices has created a culture of exploitative wages, not only at the cornflower, but many other suppliers. However, it is time that large international companies such as CheapKit recognize their responsibilities to other groups and their stakeholders and their duty to act in a public interest. In my opinion, The defective corn flour factory in Athland would not have existed without demand from CheapKit, right? It would not have been existed without the demand of CheapKit. So CheapKit needs to acknowledge its responsibilities to its supply chain accountability for the strategy. So according to Jess, CheapKit is the culprit. According to that, Jess, CheapKit is the culprit, but in the question paper, you should be remembering that you are senior finance manager and you have recently joined. So you are the employee of that company. Therefore, you have been asked to make the press report, right? Therefore, you have been asked to make the press report. Now, the last exhibit. See, these are the mini papers in which you guys are tired to read the exhibits. Of reading complete SBL paper. It would take us 1 to 2 days classes sessions to completely draft a one paper. 3 sessions might be. Right? So exhibit 5. A memo from the sales director of CheapKit about new business opportunity. All. I have been approached by the national fast food chain Yummy with a proposal for us to supply them with staff uniforms, all of the restaurants across Iceland. So now we have been offered a contract, Yummy, to provide us uniform. We deal in a cloths, right? Uniform are different type of cloths. As far as I know, this is the first time CheapKit has approached with a view of supplying a bulk order to other firm. So now this exhibit pertains to complete. This exhibit pertains to complete the last requirement, right? However, the volume of uniforms Yummy are looking by could provide us with some significant additional revenue. I have summarized details of the proposal below. Yummy are looking for supplier to supply all the shirts and trousers for its staff uniforms, which are very similar for male and female. So you need to supply both males and female staff uniforms. Volume would be minimum of 125,000 short sleeve shirts, right? And 125,000 pairs of trousers per year for 2 years at a price of 5.8 per shirt and 9.70 per pair of trousers. This price is slightly lower than the price at which we sell garments in our stores, but this reflects the size and standardized nature of the order. Plus the fact that we will not incur any of the retail cost associated with stocking and selling the shirts, right? The estimated cost of producing the garments converted to dollars and the current exchange rate will be manufacturing year 1. Now that's the science calculation here. Manufacturing year 2 allowing for wage increase. Logistics, right? And the demands are like this. The prices are being set this. If we accept the contract, it is seen that we will incur additional fixed cost of 25,000 in both years. So we're going to be incurring additional fixed cost of 25,000 in both years. Right? So that exhibit, I firmly believe, pertains to this requirement. That exhibit, I firmly believe, pertains to this requirement, right? So that's completely this requirement. Right? So here we have completely read the question. Here we have till now completely read the question. We have made some points. My answer is here, but I want you guys to at least make yourself some points and then we can read this answer by your tutor, right? And then we can read this answer by your tutor so that our class can be concluded. So I give you around 10 to 15 minutes. Just take your time, make some points of CheapKit's question, of every requirement, and then I'll be providing my answer. I'll be reading my answer in front of you so that you guys can think that whether you are appropriately making the points or not, right? Not to be focusing much on skills, not to be focusing much on formats. I'll be teaching you all formats. They are presented in my books. Don't worry. Just focus on drafting till now, right? We have a session to complete these mini mocks. Once the mini mocks are going to be completed, we are going to cover some theories, some formats, some skills to do the complete past papers, right? So it's around 15 to 20 minutes time for you. Just have a look and make points by yourself. If you guys have not attempted this question, if you guys have attempted, so send it to me and I'll check it by myself and provide it to you, the feedback, right? And for the feedback, I can ask you to come join me on Zoom and listen your story, right? So just 15 to 20 minutes, have a look on it, and then we'll be solving this question. So I've got some points from the students and they have made some really well points. Let's discuss uh few more points that I could add value in it, right? I could provide you some value. So here it is, the pastel. In pastel, again, the format required was, right? The format required in pastel, I guess it was briefing paper, right? I guess it was a briefing note. Yeah, it's briefing note. So we can create the briefing note, but since my not major focus is not on the formats now, we're gonna be take this for the later part, right? So briefing notes formats is as simple as you like. It's as simple as you like. You'll just write briefing notes. You'll just write FAO. FAO means for attention of, and whomever you are reporting, that's finance director. And that's it. Now you can write your answer, right? So just to start a bit in a professional way, that's we can analyze a business environment in which CheapKit operates using Pastel framework, right? We can analyze a business environment in which CheapKit operates using Pastel framework. I'll say to add a bit here, that would great, right? Add a bit and it would be great. The intro would be perfect, just like we made in the link. Just like we made in the link. But if you got nothing, you can keep your intro to this, right? You can keep your intro to this. Political factors. In political, what are the points you can add? The minimum wage point, yeah, that was correctly raised by the student. That the government of Iceland is expected to increase the minimum wage in its budget, right? The government of Iceland is expected to increase the minimum wage in its budget. This could be there at for CheapKit as it operates on a low cost model. So this could be a threat for CheapKit, right? This could be a threat for CheapKit. And why a threat? Because it operates on a low cost model. It operates on a low cost model, right? It's already pays its workers a minimum wage. So increase in its minimum wage could be a significant concern. Increase in its minimum wage could be a significant concern. And if you remember the points that were we need to make 10, so that means around 6 to 7 points would be enough, right? 6 to 7 points would be enough. So political got a good 1 point we raised. Political got a good 1 point that we raised, right? Economic. So now what's economic? That although Iceland currency is weakening, right? Economic, that means the economics. And the currency is weakening here, right? This could benefit CheapKit rather than being a threat. How? How this could be benefit for CheapKit rather than being a threat. Now, this is the skill that SBL examiner wants, right? Now, this is the evaluation that was examined in this question. This is the evaluation that was examined in the question, that weakening currency might not be. Weakening currency might not be the only bad factor. Why? Just define that, right? Just define that if CheapKit provides value for money, customer may switch from expensive alternatives to CheapKit. Yeah, you are a low cost model, you are a cheap suppliers, so there might be some customers who are buying expensive clothes, and since the currency is devaluing, since the inflation is higher, so they might switch to your product. So they might switch to your product. So if CheapKit provides value for money, customer may switch from expensive alternatives to CheapKit, leading to increased market share as anticipated by finance director. So finance director's anticipation is correct. He has anticipated that we might face increase in volumes, and that's because the customers, you have your own customers and you might get some more customers, right? You might get some more customers, right? Then rising commodity prices and weakening currency would lead to CheapKit increase in cost, which again can be a problem. So rising commodity prices and weakening currency would be a CheapKit. So here you write the pro of it. Here you write the con of it. So that's evaluation. Applying skills does not mean that every single line should include the skills. Your answer should be evaluating. Your answer should be analytical. Your answer should be making commercial sense. That's right. Right? So we got a good point of economics also. Then we have social. And what's that? Then we have social. And what's that? That CheapKit has so far benefited from offering fashionable goods, right? CheapKit has so far benefited from fashionable goods, right? At regular intervals on low prices. So, however, the changing attitude of customer regarding fast fashion and throwaway culture is a critical for CheapKit business. Why? Because it usually operates on new products, right? And it launches new products easily. So if customers started retaining their clothes, CheapKit might lose the sales value. If customers started retaining their clothes, CheapKit might get the low value or might get the low volumes, right? If CheapKit keeps offering high value items, it's questionable that how many customers will stop buying. Yeah, it's a good point. That if the throwaway culture led to and stop, if any movement got passed, that you are not going to throw away the old cloths, you're going to use the cloths for the 3 to 4 years. If such kind of thing has passed, that it will impact complete business model of CheapKit, right? Then it's gonna impact complete business model of CheapKit. I hope you guys understood my point here. If there are any questions, you guys can text me on WhatsApp. And now technological. CheapKit has been able to succeed so far without having e-commerce facility, right? Without having e-commerce facility, they have succeeded in this market. They are succeeding in this market. So which indicates that impact of e-commerce on CheapKit's customer is less significant, right? That indicates that impact of CheapKit's impact of e-commerce on CheapKit's customer is less significant, right? However, it will be important if CheapKit can monitor. If you are not operating online, that's not a problem. But if your competitor is operating online, it's gonna be a problem for you. But if your competitor got an online existence, it's gonna be important for you. So you must measure that whether my competitors are operating online or not, right? Or how successful they are. CheapKit needs to ensure that they don't lose any market share because of having no online facility, right? CheapKit needs to ensure that they do not lose any facility, right? And if your competitors are offering online, so you're going to be losing your market facility, right? On government to introduce new regulation, right? Since there is a global pressure on government to introduce new regulation on health and safety and working conditions, this would increase CheapKit's suppliers' cost, which in turn will increase CheapKit's cost. Just like the cornflowers government has decided to increase the health and safety and all that requirements, right? So if CheapKit's suppliers are increasing the prices, then CheapKit might also increase the price, right? CheapKit's cost gonna be increasing. So CheapKit must not be squeezing its margin. So it will increase CheapKit's cost and then it will increase CheapKit's price, right? And then CheapKit's need to increase its price. And then CheapKit needs to increase its price, right? uh, Now the second requirement, right? Now the second requirement was, if you guys remember, the second requirement here was stakeholder claims, right? And you guys don't need to write any of the answer. I have provided everything on my book and that's available, right? So don't need to write anything. Yeah, you can take a printout and you can work on yourself. You can make your pointers, everything you guys want. So now you have to analyze the CheapKit's stakeholder claims. So if you can define stakeholders, that's gonna be really great. So yeah, let's move on to the stakeholders chapter. I'll define it for you, no worries. So here are they, right? What are stakeholders? They are defined in our book are individuals or groups who are either interested in or affected by activities of the organization. Those people who are either interested in my organization or are affected by the organizational activities, right? Or are affected by the organizational activities, they are going to be stakeholders, right? So stakeholders are individuals or groups who are either interested in or going to be affected by the activities, right? There are numerous stakeholders of an organization. Shareholders can be stakeholders, right? Each stakeholder has different expectations, right? And from the organizations called stakeholders claim and conflicts. Yeah, each stakeholder is expecting something different from you. Each stakeholder is expecting something different from you. And if it is expecting something different from you, so that means if it is expecting something different from you, so that means the claim's gonna be different, because if I'm your stakeholder and then this person is your stakeholder, we both are expecting different things from you. So that means we are demanding more or something different. Stakeholders can be internal, can be external, right? Directors and employees, shareholders, unions, customers, suppliers, banks, these are all internal, externals, right? Auditors, public, pressure groups. So these are our stakeholders. Just to let you know what are our stakeholders, right? Just to let you know that what are our stakeholders. So now, stakeholders' claims of the customers, suppliers, and pressure groups. Now think of it. What my customer claim from myself would be. Just think of it. What my customers claim from myself would be. My customer claim from myself would be, what I believe is that to provide good quality product, my customer would be claiming that I should provide them a good quality product, right? And similarly, their claim would be, and to provide cheaper prices, to provide cheaper prices. Whereas my suppliers claim gonna be, I should be paying more to them. Whereas my suppliers claim gonna be, I should be paying more to them. There means I should be asking for more price for the customer. That means I should be asking for the more prices to the customer. So now if we include both of these claims, they are in conflict. Customer wants lower prices, whereas my supplier wants me to charge higher price to the customer so that I could pay them higher cost. Now these are the claims in the conflict. So let's go to the answer. Stakeholders can affect or affected by the achievements of the organization's objectives, right? A stakeholders relationship is two-way relationship. Each stakeholders group has a different expectation and has a different claim, right? Each stakeholder group has a different expectation and have a different claim, right? Now, customers, what they would want, I'll make a 3 different paras: what my customer want, what my supplier want, what the pressure groups want, and then I'll consolidate their claims, right? And then I'll consolidate their claims, right? Is it clear? CheapKit customer wants fashionable items at low price. CheapKit will need to offer clothes and styles which customer wants to buy, and also CheapKit needs to make sure of the quality, right? Also CheapKit needs to make sure of the quality. Further, in addition to the CheapKit, has to make sure availability of products as customer wants to buy on time. So these are going to be the claims of my customers, right? Good items, low prices, offer clothes and styles, make sure of the quality. CheapKit has to make sure availability of the product. So these are my customer claims. What are going to be my supplier claims? What are going to be my supplier claims? So supplier's claim is just like the CheapKit is easily likely to be a major customer or supplier. Therefore, supplier's primary interest will be retaining contract. Yeah, they might not ask more prices from me. They might not ask more prices from me because I am the biggest customer they have. So they will be willing to have a contract with me for the long term. They will be willing to have a contract with me for the long term, right? And CheapKit and revenue this brings to them. However, in case of power, CheapKit retains more power as its supplier has to ensure quality. Otherwise, CheapKit can switch supplier. So my supplier claims are here not that much important because I am the biggest customer they got, Priyar. I'm the biggest fish they have in their bowl. They cannot do anything. And then the pressure groups. Pressure groups are concerned on health and safety, conditions of supplier premises. Their concerns are more valid since the tragedy of Cornflower Factory. Yeah, here's the linking, right? Here is the linking you guys need to make. Cornflower Factory being introduced. That after that, the pressure groups situations have made more worse. They also might want a great pay for lower labor. They might also demand the greater pay for low labor, right? They might also demand the lower pay for that. Now, conflict between claims. See, CheapKit's low cost strategy is likely to conflict with pressure group's claims if good working conditions, right? So CheapKit's low cost strategy is likely to be conflict with the pressure group claims for good working conditions, right? As it will increase production cost for CheapKit. Therefore, they might be unable to offer products at low prices, hence dissatisfying customer. So CheapKit's claims of customers are conflicting with the claims of pressure groups. Pressure groups might want minimum wage. Pressure groups might want good health and safety conditions for employees. That might increase the cost for CheapKit. And if the cost for CheapKit is increased, that might increase the prices and the customer's claims would be dissatisfied. Now just look into it. Whether this question was difficult, I'll ask you. Whether this question is difficult, no. It's just a new thing that haven't been tested earlier. Similarly, supplier will try to retain contract with CheapKit and will offer low cost. However, this will collide with pressure group claims of increasing wage and good working condition. If supplier wants the contract to be made, they would be offering lower cost. But now their claim of lower cost is against pressure groups because pressure groups wants from supplier to pay their labor more. Pressure groups wants their supplier to pay their labor more, hence carrying conflict between suppliers and pressure groups, right? Hence carrying conflict between suppliers and pressure groups, right? So that on my personal view, this question is something I like, right? This question is something I like because it's a new thing. It doesn't require any model. It just wants your general, your commercial sense, your skills, and whether you are able to pick the examiner question. And SBL is just like that, right? SBL is just totally like that. You need to pick your examiner. You need to pick it up. Are there any questions, guys? Yeah. Now the risks part, that you need to define free risk, right? You need to define free risk. The skills here were commercial acumen. You should be sounding commercial, that these risks and how they are significant for CheapKit's shareholder. What were the three risks? Exchange rate risk, supply chain risk, and international political risk. Now, what a usual mistake student does, that it defines these risks in a general context, right? That the student defines these risks in a general context, which is itself a wrong thing. You should link these risks with the scenario. How is CheapKit risk defined for exchange rate risk defined for CheapKit? Because in imports, that if the currency is getting devalued, it might get exchange losses. How is supply chain differences, supply chain risk, dependency on its supplier? If the supplier has gone or just like collapsed, so it would have impacted, right? So it would have impacted. So think of these risks, guys. Think of these risks, please. So exchange rate risk. When a company trades with a foreign supplier or customer, it will expose itself to exchange rates. Obviously, it's going to be exposing itself to exchange rates or currency risk unless both share the same currency. Yeah, if both of the organizations are sharing the same currency, then this risk is minimized, right? Movement of foreign exchange rate will impact on final amount to be paid or received, right? Movements of foreign exchange rates and impact on final amount to be paid or received, right? So CheapKit pays cornflour and its other suppliers in their own currency. CheapKit pays cornflour and its other suppliers in their own currency. The risk exists that if CheapKit currency devalues, then cost of buying for CheapKit will increase, right? If CheapKit currency devalues, then cost of buying the CheapKit is going to be increasing. Last year, 65% of CheapKit's procurement was from Athland. An adverse movement in currency would create a major concern, right? So exchange rate risk is there. I could define it as simple as I can, right? But I linked it with CheapKit. 20 minutes. I linked it with CheapKit, right? I linked it with CheapKit. So this is how you need to define your right. Yeah, supply chain risk. Now what's that? So this is a risk that CheapKit will fail to procure necessary supplies. So it's a risk that CheapKit is going to be fail to procure necessary supplies to meet demand from customers, right? To meet demand from customers. So CheapKit imports relies heavily from imports, right? From Athland. So CheapKits imports relies heavily from imports from Athland, and collapse from CheapKit's major supplier indicates that it would not deliver orders on time. So that's a risk. It's a significant risk because your one supplier will collapse, for which 65% of your dependency brings. So if it collapses, you're not going to secure your books, right? You're not going to secure that. Therefore, risk of supplies is significant, right? Therefore, risk of supplies is significant. Then we have international political risk. Now, what's that? See, political risk is risk that political action will affect position and value of organizations. Political action affect position and value of organization, right? It is commented from the range of trading foreign, since if it can be entity is not trading in foreign, then would not be into an international political risk. Yeah. If your entity is not trading foreign, right? If your entity is not trading on foreign, so it might get no international political risk, right? Because you are not in the foreign. If you are trading in foreign, then any change in their political regime could impact you. Any change in their political regime could impact you. Since CheapKit is heavily reporting from Athland, right? Since CheapKit is heavily importing from Athland, the risk is significant. Also, the concerns raised on collapse of buildings of CheapKit supplier may also lead to strong political actions. Yeah, because now their country's buildings is collapsed, the political actions would be taken. There might be limitations imposed on the exports of that country. There might be limitation imposed of the hiring on that country, right? Which could be favorable. This could be also be a damage to reputation of CheapKit, as CheapKit deals in a country where corrupt practices. Yeah, this could also be a CheapKit. If their country are just declared, if their country declared, if their country just declared that we have been in the bad practices, so it might impact CheapKit's revenue. That what CheapKit is doing in that country. That what CheapKit is doing in that country. So these were the three risks presented there, right? These were the three risks presented there, and their significance. You could see, beauty of SBL is you could write on your own. My answer might be different from my student's answer, but my students can get more marks than mine, right? So it totally depends on you. So these were the three requirements. We get through it, and I hope it's clear, right? Now we are left with press statement and then the yummy contract. We'll be doing this by today, and we have to do it, right? I need to make you show that communication we used in press statement, right? So that we can move on to the next past paper. This device battery is low, so just give me a few minutes and I'll come through the other device, right? I'll come through the other device. Hello, everyone. I apologize that the recorded just got interrupted, right? It's because of the internet connection, I guess. So we were discussing CheapKit question, right? We were discussing CheapKit question, and in that we had a discussion on the three questions, right? In that we had a discussion on the three questions that were the pestle analysis, which is similar to the other question, right? Which is similar to the other question you guys have done in the last class. That's Ling. And after that, we had a discussion on stakeholders' claims. That was my favorite question from that particular requirement, from that particular thing, right? That's my favorite question here. And then we have discussed the risk and its significance. Now, the last two requirements were, one was easy, the yummy contract, whereas the other one seems tricky one, that press releases. And therefore, I want you to complete this session, right? Therefore, I want to complete this session. My devices just got charged, wiped out. So therefore, I used another device. I'm using another device to make you learn the press statement, right? I hope my screen and voice is clear. If someone can confirm this, just that my voice and screen is clear, that's going to be perfect. And then we can continue with the press statement, right? Yeah. So see, press statement does not have itself any, I'll say press statement does not have itself any format. It's just like, it's just like you guys have got writing the heading, that's press statements, right? And you'll be saying that issued by board of CheapKit in response to the recent events in Athland. So you'll be saying that issued by board of CheapKit in response to the recent events in Athland, right? That's the heading that was given you in the question, right? That was given to you in the question. And why is that? Because press statement just requires an extract that to be posted in the press, right? And why you are doing this, just to remind you guys, you have gotten negative responses, and you got a article from the Jess Louis, blog from the Jess Louis, and you need to reply them as a corporate citizen, right? Being the board. Now see, the board of CheapKit wishes to issue the following statement in response to comments received, right? Following a recent tragic event in the cornflower factory in Athland. So now you'll first clear yourself that who are we and what we want to do. So we want to clear the responses, right? So we want to clear the responses in addition, in perspective to the building that have been collapsed, right? Tragic event in cornflower factory in Athland, right? The building that was collapsed, and we want to issue a statement just because we got some comments, right? The cornflower factory is one of the CheapKit's major supplier, and we wish to express greatest condolences and sympathy to all those affected. Now, this should be the first line of any tragic event, right? This is communication skills. This is communication skills, how to communicate. Since you have got news of a tragic event, you'll first say that the cornflower factory is one of the cheapest major supplier, and we wish to express our condolences for sympathy to all those who are affected, right? The cornflower factory is one of the CheapKit's major supplier, and we express this condolences for that, right? Now, we should like to reassure our shareholders and general public that we are working closely with our contacts in Athland. Now, see how we are going to communicate them. We had no responsibility, but still we are working closely with the public officials in the Athland in order to establish why building collapsed and trying to ensure that this disaster never happens again, right? And trying to ensure that this disaster never happens again. The statement will also addresses on CheapKit's role as a corporate citizen, because it was the requirement that you need to identify your role as a corporate citizen, right? Because there was a requirement that you need to identify your role as a corporate citizen. So you need to do that. You need to do that, right? So corporate citizen is a contribution an organization makes to societies through their activities, right? Corporate citizenship is the contribution an organization makes to societies through the activities. Their core principles which define corporate citizen, which every company should apply, is minimizing harm to society. Now, these are all theoretical lines which you guys can incorporate, right? Three core principles which define corporate citizen, which every company should apply, is minimizing harm to society, maximizing benefit, and being accountable to all stakeholders. Now, CheapKit has the right to conduct business with suppliers and customers within the confines of law in each country, right? So CheapKit has the right to conduct, right, business with suppliers and customers within the confines of law in each country which it operates. We have all times acted lawfully with respect to our customer or supplier. Now we are clearing our position here. The tragic event in Athland occurred because of illegal practices in that jurisdiction. Not in our jurisdiction, guys. In that jurisdiction, which were beyond our control. Their political system is bad. We didn't know. They have the bribe system. We didn't know. Now, in front of the press, we get cleared ourselves, right? In front of the press, we are getting ourselves clear. Although we expect that our suppliers are responsible for their own actions, we will be receiving the steps to minimize the tragic events. We recognize our responsibility to our stakeholders. Therefore, we are always keen to provide our customers value for money and maximizing shareholders' wealth. We'll try to cover best to pay the fair price for the goods purchased from the suppliers. And still, we ended conclusively very well that we'll try to pay as much as our supplier demands to be fair enough, right? So this is how the tone of a press releases are made, right? This is how the tone of a press releases are made, right? Now, the last question, that's really simple, right? Last question is that simple that you have to considering the financial returns, right, of this contract. That's simply you need to make P&L, sales, then manufacturing cost. I've just made it, right? I've just made it in the book. Year one's fixed cost, year one's profit, year two's profit. Then I'll draft here that it's a positive contribution. You should accept minimum figures that actual orders can be difficult. Yeah, it's just an assumed orders. Actuals can be difficult. Order change. Yeah, procurement foreign, right? Exchange rate risk because we are going to procure, so there might be exchange rate risk. So now these are the drafting prices. Cost increases but no price increases. They have kept the prices same for the 2 years, but 2 years cost have increases, right? Raw materials, profit is declining. Target market, we have no markets in the restaurants or any kind of food chain. We directly market to the consumer, and consumer, we have expertise on that, right? We didn't have any expertise on the hotels or the restaurants and their uniforms. So this might be a new segment. So you need to conclude it in that way, right? So I haven't drafted the fifth question. I just made some pointers for you. And I guess you guys must be having a great skill till now to write that, right? So if you guys haven't attempted the CheapKit, so I've attempted it for you. You just need to replicate my answer and just identify if there are any differences. And then after today's class, you guys have been obliged to do the fourth mini mock presented in my book on page number 255. That's Tomusco. So you need to do that, right? You need to do that. And then I'll try to solve that question with you yourself, and then we can move on to the format, skills, and theoretical portion so that we should start our main SBL papers, right? So have a great time, all of you. Have a great weekend. Take care. Allah Hafiz.